The girl in the alley. Rain poured from the dark sky as Jacob closed his food stall for the night. The streets were quiet, empty and cold. Most people had already gone home, hiding from the storm. But Jacob worked late, as always, wiping down the counter and locking up the side doors. He wore a thin jacket and kept his head low, avoiding the cold wind. As he stepped into the alley behind his stall to take out the trash, he heard something strange. It wasn't a cat or a dog, not even a rat. It was a soft whimper, like a child crying, but broken, almost musical. Jacob stopped, one hand still holding the garbage bag. He looked around and saw movement behind the old crates. He stepped closer, heart pounding. The sound grew louder. There, hiding in the shadows, was a figure. She was small, maybe 12 or 13 years old in size, but she didn't look human. Her skin had a pale blue shimmer. Her hair was silver, sticking to her face from the rain. Her eyes glowed faintly green in the darkness, and her arms were thin like branches. Jacob froze, unsure what to do. She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes but didn't run. Instead, her stomach growled loudly, and she clutched it. Jacob slowly put the trash down and reached into his pocket. He had a leftover sandwich wrapped in paper, slightly crushed but still good. He held it out slowly, crouching so he wouldn't scare her. The girl didn't move at first, then inch by inch, she crawled forward and snatched the sandwich. She unwrapped it and began eating fast, like she hadn't eaten in days. Jacob stayed silent, watching. She chewed with her eyes closed, letting out a soft hum with every bite. He noticed the cuts on her arms and bruises on her legs. She was hurt, tired, and alone. But before he could ask anything, she stood up suddenly. She turned and ran down the alley, disappearing into the shadows. Jacob blinked, unsure if it had really happened. The rain washed away the footprints quickly, leaving only the sandwich wrapper on the ground. That night, Jacob couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the strange girl. Who was she? Where did she come from? Was she even from Earth? He wanted to believe it was just a dream, but his pocket was still missing the sandwich. The next day, he left another sandwich behind the stall, just in case she came back. She didn't. The day after that, he left a bottle of water too. Still nothing. People walked past his stall, chatting, laughing, never knowing what had happened in the alley. On the third night, the rain returned. So did the sound. Jacob had just turned off the lights when he heard it again, the soft cry. This time, he walked slowly toward the alley, careful not to make noise, and there she was, standing under the flickering streetlight. But she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a taller figure, wrapped in a strange cloak, the same glowing eyes but sharper, older. The woman looked straight at Jacob, her face unreadable. The young girl pointed at him and made a soft clicking sound. The woman stepped forward, her hand on the girl's shoulder. Jacob didn't move, unsure what to say or do. Then, the woman bent down, placing something on the wet ground. It was a small glowing stone, blue and warm. She nodded once, then turned to leave. The girl hesitated, then ran back, reached up and touched Jacob's hand. Then she turned and followed the woman into the night. Jacob stood there, staring at the glowing stone, unsure what it meant. He picked it up, and it pulsed gently in his hand, warm, almost alive. As he walked back inside, he noticed something else. His old radio on the shelf was on. He hadn't touched it in weeks, but it was playing something. Now, not music, not a broadcast. It was voices, strange, echoing, not in any language he knew. But somehow, it sounded familiar, like it was meant for him. Jacob sat down, stone in one hand, radio whispering in the other. For the first time in his life, he felt like something bigger had begun, something not of this world. Asterisk, she came back with another. The city didn't sleep that night. Lights blinked in windows, and sirens cried in the distance. But inside Jacob's small home, the glowing stone sat silently on his table. It pulsed softly, like it was breathing. Jacob hadn't slept. He just sat there staring at it, listening to the strange whispers from his old radio. He didn't understand a single word, and yet he couldn't turn it off. Every time he tried, the volume rose by itself, and every time he walked away, the stone pulsed faster. He felt like something was waiting, watching. The next morning, he left early. The streets were soaked, and puddles reflected the gray sky. As he approached his food stall, something made him stop. There, leaning against the alley wall, was the girl, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a woman taller, stronger, wrapped in something that looked like armor. Her eyes glowed brighter than the girl's. Her skin was the same pale blue, but covered in faint patterns like scars or tattoos. She held a long staff across her back, but she didn't seem like she wanted to fight. Jacob felt his heart skip. The girl looked up and smiled, a small, tired smile, but the woman's face stayed cold. Jacob raised his hands, slowly showing he meant no harm. The girl stepped forward and placed her hand over her heart, then pointed at him. She turned to the woman and made a series of clicking and humming sounds. The woman watched Jacob for a long moment, then finally nodded, without a word. She stepped forward and opened her hand. Another stone, larger than the first, hovered above her palm. It shined with a deeper blue light, spinning slowly in the air. She gently placed it on Jacob's food stall, then backed away. Her eyes never left his. Jacob didn't know what to say. "Do you need food?" he asked. The girl nodded quickly, then pulled the woman's arm, guiding her toward the crates where she had hidden days before. Jacob reached into his stall and handed over a warm sandwich and a bottle of water. The woman hesitated, then took it, sniffed it, and gave it to the girl. The girl ate quickly, her eyes full of gratitude. Jacob leaned against the wall and sighed. "What's going on?" he muttered to himself, as if in response. The new stone on his counter pulsed once, then again. Brighter, his radio, back inside his home, turned on by itself again. This time, the words weren't just alien. They were mixing with his own language. Connection established. Protector marked. Observation begins. Jacob stared at the stone in horror. He hadn't agreed to anything, but it didn't seem to matter. The woman stepped forward again and looked Jacob straight in the eye. "Safe here?" she asked, her voice rough and low, like she hadn't spoken in years. Jacob blinked, shocked that she had spoken his language, even if only a little. "Yes," he said quietly. "Safe here." She nodded slowly, then turned around, holding the girl's hand, and began to walk away. But after only a few steps, the girl stopped. She looked back at Jacob, her eyes full of worry. She said something in her language, sharp and urgent. The woman looked down at her, then back at Jacob. Without warning, they both walked past him right into his stall. Then they sat down on the floor, quiet and still, as if waiting. Jacob turned, confused. "Are you staying?" he asked. The woman didn't answer, but the girl did. She nodded, then pointed to the glowing stone again. Jacob picked it up, and as he did, the words on the radio changed again. "Shelter confirmed. Bond accepted. Host acknowledged." Jacob sat down slowly, heart racing. He didn't know what bond they were talking about. He didn't understand how a sandwich had turned into all this. But one thing was clear, he wasn't alone anymore. He looked at the girl, now curled up beside the counter, already falling asleep, and at the woman, who sat with her back to the wall. Her eyes closed, but her hand still near her weapon. Whatever was happening wasn't over. It had just begun. Jacob leaned back and looked at the sky through the small stall roof. Rain began to fall again, gentle and cold, and inside his stall, two aliens found their first moment of peace in who knows how long. They asked to stay. The morning sun crept slowly over the rooftops, but Jacob's stall was still closed, not because he overslept, but because he wasn't alone anymore. Inside the small metal-walled room, the girl slept curled up beneath a clean blanket Jacob had found. The woman sat cross-legged beside her, eyes open, unmoving, like a statue carved from starlight. She hadn't blinked in hours. Jacob had tried to speak, but she only responded with nods or silence. He made tea, hoping the warmth would soften the tension. He placed one cup in front of her and kept the other for himself. Steam rose between them, but she didn't touch it. She only stared at the rising sun, her expression unreadable. "I don't even know your names," Jacob said gently. The woman turned to look at him, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. She pointed to herself and said a word slow, low, and full of weight. "Vale." Then she pointed to the sleeping girl. "Airy," Jacob repeated the names quietly. "Vale and Airy." Vale nodded once. Then she did something Jacob didn't expect. She placed her hand on the glowing stone in the center of the stall. A soft pulse rippled through the air, and Jacob's radio began to speak again. Translation pattern stabilizing. Language. Link forming. Jacob's eyes widened. "Can you talk through that?" Vale's lips didn't move, but the radio responded in her voice, though slow and broken. "Safe. Here. Is it true?" Jacob looked at Airy, still sleeping, her cheeks no longer hollow, her breathing calm. "Yes," he said softly. "You're safe here." Vale looked at him for a long moment. Then, in a voice mixed between her own and the machine's, she said, "We asked to stay, not long." But until safe, Jacob opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. He looked around at his tiny stall, 2 chairs, a counter, some dry food, a few blankets. It wasn't much, but it was all he had, and somehow, it was enough for them. "All right." Jacob finally said, "You can stay," the radio buzzed gently, and Vale gave a short, respectful bow. She then reached into a hidden pouch in her cloak and placed a small metal disc on the table. The disc opened like a flower, revealing a holographic screen. Dozens of symbols floated in the air. Jacob didn't understand any of it, but one thing stood out. Aries' face. Glowing in the center, Vale tapped the display, and red markers circled the girl's image. A second later, a warning appeared, written in both alien script and broken English. Subject being tracked. Royal biomarker detected. Threat level severe. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. "Royal?" he whispered, looking at the girl. Vale nodded slowly. "She. Not ordinary. Hunted." Jacob sank into his chair, feeling the weight of the truth. Airy wasn't just a lost child, she was something important. Maybe dangerous, maybe sacred, and by feeding her, sheltering her, he had pulled himself into a storm he didn't understand. Vale stood and walked to the door of the stall. Looking out at the waking city, she scanned the streets, her hand never far from her strange staff. Jacob followed her gaze and noticed 2 dark figures across the street. Watching, they weren't normal pedestrians. They didn't blink, didn't move, just stood there in the rain. "Hunters?" he asked. Vale's jaw tightened. "Scouts," she replied through the radio. "Soon. More come." Jacob turned to look at Airy, who had just begun to stir. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking at the morning light. When she saw him, she smiled, then reached for his hand. Jacob took it gently, her skin warm and smooth. In that moment, he knew he couldn't let her go. Whatever she was, whatever danger followed, he wouldn't hand her over. He had made a key choice the night he gave her food. Now he had to stand by it. "I'll find a better place for you," he said. "Something safer than a food stall." Vale looked at him, surprised. "Why?" she asked. "Not your fight." Jacob stood tall, meeting her eyes. "Because no one else did," he said. "And I won't be like the others." Vale stared at him for a moment longer, then finally gave a slow, deep nod. From that point on, Jacob wasn't just sheltering 2 aliens. He was protecting something much greater. And the city, still unaware, would soon learn that kindness had consequences. Hunters in the dark. The city lights flickered just after midnight. At first, no one noticed, just a moment of darkness, like a power glitch. But for Jacob, it felt like a warning. Inside his small apartment above the closed food stall, he stood frozen. The glowing stone on his shelf dimmed for the first time since it arrived. Vale was already awake, her body tense, her cloak pulled tight. Airy sat silently in the corner, hugging her knees, eyes locked on the window. Then came the sound, soft, sharp, like claws tapping glass. Jacob moved to the window and peeked through the curtain. Across the street, 3 figures stood beneath a broken street lamp. They wore long black coats and metallic masks. But what made Jacob's skin crawl was their stillness. No movement, no shifting weight, no breath he could see in the cold air. Just silence. Ari whimpered softly, and Vale placed a hand on her shoulder. "They are here," Vale said through the radio, her voice flat. "Hounds." Jacob didn't ask what they were. He already knew they weren't human. The one in the center slowly raised its head, even behind the mask. Jacob felt its eyes pierce straight through the wall. "They know," he whispered. Vale turned to him, her voice low and final. "We must run." Jacob didn't hesitate. He grabbed the backpack he had prepared 2 days ago. Food, water, battery packs, medicine, and the 2 stones. Vale handed him a strange device, shaped like a compass but humming with energy. "Signal blocker," she said. "We have 15 minutes. They slipped into the alley, the rain returning in a cold whisper. Jacob led them through side paths, past dumpsters and broken fences. He knew the city well, better than most, but this was different. Behind them, the shadows moved, not fast, but with purpose. At every corner, Jacob checked the compass. When it turned red, they changed direction. When it buzzed, they stopped and waited. The hounds never made a sound, but their presence filled the air like smoke. Vale moved like a soldier, her eyes scanning every rooftop and drain. She carried Ari. When the little girl grew tired, never slowing down, Jacob felt something strange in his chest. Not fear, not yet, but something close. A sense that if he stumbled once, it would all be over. They reached the old subway entrance near East Block, long shut down, sealed after flooding 10 years ago. Jacob pulled aside the chained gate and led them inside. The smell of mold and rust filled their noses, but down here, the stone glowed brighter. They were harder to track underground. They moved past broken trains and shattered glass. Ari coughed quietly, and Jacob offered her water. She took it with both hands, her small fingers trembling. Vale sat nearby, breathing hard, her weapon across her lap. Then she spoke. "Too close," Jacob nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "We need help," he said. "I have a friend outside the city. He owes me." Vale tilted her head. "Can you trust him?" Jacob didn't answer right away. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we're out of choices." Suddenly, the stone in his pocket glowed red. He pulled it out just in time to see alien symbols flash across its surface. Vale's radio voice translated them before he could ask. "They have deployed a beacon. Our location is compromised." Jacob stood, grabbed the bag, and reached for Ari's hand. "We move now," he said, before they could exit the tunnel. The ground above them shook, dust fell from the ceiling, and a screech echoed through the dark. The hounds had found a way in. One of them dropped silently behind an old train car. Its mask reflected the stone's light, cold and inhuman. Vale raised her weapon and fired. A bolt of blue light struck the creature, but it didn't fall. It screeched again, louder, summoning more. Jacob didn't look back. He pulled Ari close and ran. Vale covered them, firing shot after shot, the tunnel flashing with each blast. They burst through an old maintenance hatch and climbed into the back of an empty loading truck. Jacob slammed the door shut just as Vale dove in. Outside, more screeches filled the air. The truck roared to life. Jacob had hot-wired it days ago, just in case. Now it was their only chance. As the city shrank behind them, Ari looked back. Her lips trembled, and she spoke in a soft whisper. "Why us?" Vale didn't answer, but Jacob gripped the wheel tighter. "Because you're special," he said, "and they know it." As the rain turned to fog and the city disappeared behind gray hills, none of them saw the black ship rise slowly over the skyline, watching and marking its prey. The truth about the girl. The sun never touched the place they hid in next. A forgotten train station buried beneath the hills. Dust blanketed every corner, wires dangled from the ceiling, and the only light came from a single flickering bulb above. The bench where Ari sat quietly, her legs swung back and forth, too small for the bench, too tired to keep still. Jacob wiped sweat from his brow as he paced the room. He checked the door again, even though he knew it was locked. Vale leaned against the wall, silent, staring at a broken map of Earth transit lines. She hadn't spoken since they arrived. Ari hadn't either. But the silence was different now, not fear, not exhaustion. It was waiting. Something was coming. And they all felt it. Jacob stopped and looked at them both. "Tell me," he said firmly. "Tell me what she is." Vale turned slowly, her eyes glowing dimly in the dark. "She is rare," the radio crackled, her voice mechanical, slow. Jacob folded his arms. "Rare doesn't send hunters across galaxies." Vale walked over to Ari and placed her hand on the girl's head. "She carries the core," she said. "The what?" Jacob asked. "The life seed," Vale continued. "Born once every 100 cycles. Her kind lost the power long ago." Jacob knelt beside Ari, who looked up at him with tired, glowing eyes. "So she's like royalty?" Vale shook her head. "Not just royalty. More." She placed a small round device on the floor, and it activated silently. A soft sphere of light appeared above it, spinning slowly, showing a star system Jacob didn't recognize. Vale pointed to one of the larger planets. "Homeworld." "Fallen," she said. "Destroyed when the last bearer vanished." Jacob stood slowly, trying to process it all. "You're telling me she can bring it back?" Vale nodded. "With her, life begins again." Jacob looked at Ari, who didn't speak but gently reached for his hand. A soft warmth passed through his fingers, and he felt something strange, peace, like standing under sunlight, even though there was none. "She's more than a child," Jacob whispered. "She's hope," Vale answered. "But why me?" he asked. "Why was I the one she found?" Vale stared at him for a long time. "She chose." Jacob remembered that moment in the rain, the first time she reached out for food, the first time she touched his hand. He had thought he was saving her, but maybe she had been saving him too. The stone on the table pulsed suddenly. The radio clicked alive. Warning: proximity breach, non-terrestrial. Signature approaching. Vale grabbed her weapon instantly, her calm shattering. "Scouts again?" Jacob asked. Vale shook her head. "Worse." A new sound filled the room, a hum so deep it made the walls shake. Jacob looked through the cracked doorway and saw blue lights flickering in the distance. Not ships, not drones, it was something. Walking, heavy footsteps, too slow, too steady. Ari stood up quietly and walked to the door. "Ari, no," Jacob said, but Vale stopped him. "Let her," she whispered. The girl stepped outside into the cold dark. She held out her hand, and the lights in the distance froze. The hum stopped. Then, from her palm, a bright sphere of energy formed, not fire, not weapon life, green and golden, pulsing like a heartbeat. Even the machines bowed their heads. Jacob watched in awe as the shadows retreated. The machines turned and walked away, leaving them untouched. Ari turned back, her expression unreadable. "She showed them," Vale said. "She is not prey." Jacob finally understood why the hunters wanted her, not to destroy her, but to control her. And if they did, entire worlds would fall under their rule. "She needs to be protected," Jacob said quietly. Vale nodded. "But I'm just a cook," he added. Vale looked at him with a strange smile. "You were. Now you are guardian." Jacob felt the weight of the words settle in his chest. He had no armor, no training, no weapons, but he had something the girl believed in: kindness, and in a galaxy tearing itself apart, that might be the rarest power of all. Humanity's kindness. The wind howled outside the shelter like it carried a warning. Jacob didn't sleep that night. Instead, he watched Ari as she lay curled beneath a silver blanket, a faint glow rising from her skin. Vale stood by the entrance, silent, motionless, listening. The walls of the abandoned storage station creaked. With every breeze, But something deeper trembled in the ground. Jacob stepped outside just before dawn. He felt it in his chest before he heard it. Pressure, above him. Clouds swirled unnaturally, drawn toward a center point in the sky. And then he saw it. A ship larger than a city, drifting down like a shadow across the horizon. Black, curved, smooth like bone, yet humming like a machine. Vale joined him silently, her face unreadable. "That's not a scout," Jacob said. "No," she replied through the stone. "That is a judge." Jacob felt his stomach twist. "A judge?" "Decider," she said. "It will demand her. Or destroy." Inside, Eri woke up without being called, as if she already knew. She walked barefoot to the doorway, her eyes glowing stronger than before. She took Jacob's hand and placed something in his palm. A crystal, glowing white and soft like moonlight. "What is this?" he asked. Eri looked up and whispered one word in her tongue. Then the radio translated it slowly. "Gift." Suddenly, everything around Jacob changed. The air shimmered, the noise of the ship vanished, and in its place came silence pure. Deep, endless. He stood no longer on Earth, but in a place of memory, a field of stars above him, and a sea of glowing plants below. Eri stood in the middle, her hair flowing like mist, her arms open. "This is her soul," Vale's voice echoed. Around him, though her body wasn't there, "She offers you bond. Protection through connection." Jacob felt his chest tighten. "Why me?" "Because you gave without asking," the voice answered. "You gave when she had nothing." He stepped forward and reached for Eri's hand as their palms touched. The stars exploded around them, and he fell back into his body, sweating, gasping, alive. The sky outside burned orange as the ship descended. From its underbelly, a massive figure landed tall. Cloaked in metal and surrounded by mist, it had no face. Just a smooth silver mask and a deep voice that cracked the air like thunder. "Human," it said. "Deliver the core child, and your world will be untouched." Eri hid behind Jacob, clutching his coat. Vale raised her weapon. But Jacob stepped forward. He didn't speak. He only opened his palm and showed the crystal Eri gave him. The figure stopped. The air around them grew still. Then, without warning, every drone above the ship stopped glowing. The judge spoke again, softer now. "She gave it to you." Jacob nodded. "I didn't take her," he said. "She chose to stay." The figure tilted its head. "Then she is under your protection. And your consequences." The judge turned and walked away, its shadow shrinking with each step. Moments later, the ship lifted, turned, and disappeared into the clouds. The ground was quiet. The sky cleared, and the birds began to sing again. Vale turned to Jacob, her eyes wide in disbelief. "You made it leave." Jacob looked down at the small hand still holding his. "I didn't fight it," he said. "I just told the truth." Eri smiled, and the crystal in his hand faded into light. It was no longer needed. The bond was complete. She had chosen a protector, not because he was strong, but because he was kind. The world left behind. They left at night. No goodbyes, no lights, no trail. Just a whisper in the wind and a single step into the shadows. Jacob never looked back at the food stall he once called home. It stood empty now, vines creeping across the walls, the wooden sign swaying in silence. He sat in the corner of the quiet starship, a thin blanket wrapped around him. Across from him, Eri slept peacefully, her head on his lap, her skin no longer pale, her breathing calm, her glow steady. She was safe now, not because of power or weapons, but because someone chose to care. Vale stood at the control deck, speaking in a low tone to the ship's core. The vessel moved like water through the black void of space. No sound, no friction, just endless stars passing like forgotten dreams. Jacob watched the stars but didn't feel lost. He felt like he finally understood what it meant to leave something behind, not because he wanted to escape, but because it was time. Earth was fading behind them, a small blue dot in the distance. He thought about the city, the rain, the alley where he met Airy, how one act of kindness had changed the fate of galaxies. He had been a stranger to her, and she had been something beyond his understanding. Yet here they were, two souls from different worlds, now bound forever. Vale approached and sat beside him. "Destination ahead," she said. Jacob nodded slowly. "Is it peaceful?" Vale looked at him, her voice softer than he'd ever heard. "Not yet. But it will be." Airy stirred in her sleep and opened her eyes. When she saw Jacob, she smiled. He smiled back and brushed a strand of glowing hair from her face. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded and whispered something he didn't understand. But he felt the meaning all the same. She was home. Wherever he was, she was home. They landed on a planet of golden grass and purple skies. Mountains floated in the distance, and rivers glowed under twin suns. Airy stepped out first, barefoot, laughing as the wind danced around her. Vale followed, walking tall and proud, her eyes scanning the horizon. Jacob stood last, breathing in the alien air, and felt peace like never before. No walls, no fear, no more running, just sky, warmth, and the girl who had once shivered in his alley. She ran to him, hugged him tightly, and didn't let go. He closed his eyes and held her back. The galaxy didn't know his name, but it would remember what he had done, not because he fought or ruled or conquered, but because he gave someone food when no one else would, because when others turned away, he stayed. And that was how the world changed, not with fire, but with kindness.